Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Library Talk and everything else. I'm your host, DJ JC. Today's Thursday, December 4th, 2025. We didn't have a show last week because to the day it was Thanksgiving, and hopefully everybody had a wonderful holiday, a wonderful break from school, a wonderful break from the responsibilities of having to study and everything that comes along with it. But thank you so much for being here. I do want to mention that it is our last show. It's our last show for the semester, and I do want to thank Ariana and the rest of the staff at Vaquero Radio for their support of the show, for helping us every week, setting up week after week. And so, thank you to her and to her staff. They make it a lot easier of a transition from getting started to beginning to end. So, thank you so much, everybody, as well for joining us. And if you're a first time listener, thank you so much for discovering the show. Hopefully, if you enjoy this content, you go back and listen to other shows that have been placed on the Vaquero Radio YouTube channel. We are still pending some episodes from this semester, but I know the staff is working to put those on to the UTRGV YouTube Vaquero Radio channel. And so go back and listen to not only this show, but all the other shows that are so wonderfully produced here at UTRGV. So I was thinking about a topic for today. And right now we are in the Christmas holiday year, and all the new movies that are coming out are supposed to be the blockbuster movies. Movies like Wicked, movies like the other ones that we're waiting for on Christmas. But there's a movie that kind of went under the radar, and that was The Running Man. And I am a big fan. I've talked about this before of Stephen King, and we actually had an episode about Stephen King and his writings in early October. And one of the books that Stephen King has written is The Running Man. He's the author of that book. And that book is about a down on his luck man who is in search of money to support himself and support his family. The best way to find this money is to go through a game show. So I thought to myself, that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, there is a 1987 movie called The Running Man, which is also based on Stephen King's novel. And that is a wonderful movie, but it is so cheesy. It is so out there. It's by Arnold Schwarzenegger. And I really love that Running Man version of the story. Now, according to what I've read and according to what I've heard, this second movie with Glenn Powell is supposed to be closer to the book than the original one, but I really like the original one. It is so campy and so cheesy. The lines and Arnold Schwarzenegger, need I say more? So what I thought about was, let's talk about game shows today. I know it is our last episode, so we're going to just play all sorts of music from Christmas to everything in between. Thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate you joining us for our last episode of the semester. You're listening to Library Talk and everything else only on Vaquero Radio, the Valley's student station. Thank you so much, everybody. Again, a little bit of Christmas to get us going. We are December 4th, and in 20 days will be Christmas Eve. So it is going to go by very fast. If you are a student that needs assistance as we finish up the semester, please come by and see us at the library. We're here to assist you. We have a wonderful staff. Edinburgh, Brownsville, Harlingen, come by and see us. We know things are going to happen very quickly. Things are going to happen rapidly where we start having to turn in assignments, research, and things like that. So if there's any way that the library can support you, come by and see us. As I mentioned earlier, today we're going to be talking about game shows, and we've all watched game shows at some point, and we've rooted for the contestants. We cheer them on when they win these big prizes, and even if we don't know these people, we are cheering them on. And we feel bad when they lose by just a silly answer, or they lose because they couldn't do the activity, or whatever happens to them. We just feel bad even though we don't know them. And we think to ourselves, I can do that. I can be on a game show. I know enough trivia. I can do some of the physical challenges. There's even a 24-hour game show network that shows classic game shows, and it also shows original content. And so it's the Game Show Network. And if you have cable, if you have streaming services, it is a 24-hour game show network, and it is really cool. I've found myself watching classic episodes of Let's Make a Deal and Price is Right with Bob Barker. And if you don't know who these people are, please go back and research some of these individuals that we're talking about and some of these game shows, because I know I may be speaking to a generation that knows what game shows are and maybe a generation of young listeners who don't really know what game shows are. So please, I encourage you, if you want to just watch TV where you don't really have to think, go and check out these different game shows. And today we're going to take a look at game shows. And one of the topics that I really enjoy talking about and I've done research on, but nobody's willing to listen and wants to sit through a conversation, is about the game show and quiz show scandals of the 1950s. Yes, the game show and quiz show scandals of the 1950s. It's one of those conversations where once I start talking about it, it seems like it reminds me of when I was a little kid and I wanted to play a board game, and my friends were like, "Oh, you know what? I think my mom is calling me. I think I have to head home," because they didn't want to play that game. And that's sort of what I feel like when I start talking about or start bringing up the quiz show and game show scandals of the 1950s. But since I have a captive audience and it's my last show, I wanted to bring that up because I've done so much research and I've watched several different documentaries on this topic. And the reason it interests me and the reason I became interested in the quiz show scandals of the 1950s were because there was a movie that came out in 1994, and it's one of my favorite movies. It's called Quiz Show, and it has a wonderful cast. You have Robert Redford directing it. You have Ralph Fiennes. You have John Turturro. You have Rob Morrow, and it is a wonderful movie. And again, they take some liberties, but the overall picture is about the quiz show scandals of the 1950s. And you may be wondering, why am I bringing this up, or what kind of context am I talking about this? And we're going to look at the research question right now. But I mentioned Robert Redford, and it is a little timely because he did pass away, and he was such a prolific actor, Academy Award winning actor, director, and he directed Quiz Show in 1994. And for those younger listeners, he was actually recently, before he passed away, in the Marvel Universe, and he was part of the Avengers series, so he's part of the MCU. And so I bring him up again, a connection, a tenuous connection to Robert Redford because he just passed away several months back. But today's research question is going to be, how did those quiz shows of the 1950s and the scandals reshape U.S. broadcasting, regulations, and public trust in television? And in what ways did they and their legacy influence the design and ethical standards of modern game shows today? So there is repercussions from this 1950 quiz show scandals, and we're going to talk about that. Again, how did these quiz shows, how did they affect today's television and game shows and other shows? And we'll talk about that as well. But if you're sitting there and you're wondering, what is a game show? What this guy's talking about game shows? What exactly is that? Well, I have a definition, and this is a quote from Game Shows from a PBS documentary entitled Pioneers of Television. And it says here, Americans began listening to game shows on the radio and were immediately hooked on to the excitement and thrill of competition. As television came to an age in the 1940s and 1950s, game shows made the natural transition to the new medium. There is something about watching contestants match wits on screen. We love to play along, shouting answers at the television. And again, this is from a PBS documentary entitled Pioneers of Television. And that's what this show is about. If you're just joining us for the first time, it is a research-based show where we take a research question, we start breaking it down with responsible, credible data, credible information. As a librarian, I've done the research to present this episode to you based on resources from the library, from the internet, and credible and reliable materials that you can go back and reference. So that quote talks about the birth of the television game shows. And again, this is going to be a very history-centric, very history-heavy episode, but we're going to try to make it as easy as possible. And again, that's a topic that we, or at least I like to talk about, because there's so much that happened as a result of World War II and you'll see as we go along through the presentation, and I'm so excited to talk about this. You probably hear it in my voice that I am really interested in this topic. So if we look at the birth of the television game shows, going back to the late 40s, and again, think about the late 40s being a time after World War II. After World War II, we are now in this time of prosperity. We are now in this time where we want to enjoy life. We worked hard, we fought, we lived hard, and now it is time for us to relax. It is time for us to take a step back and say, you know what? Now let's see what is at home for us to entertain us. Think about the baby boomers. This is a time of that. Think about what was happening in other cultural moments. Elvis Presley, and I'll talk about Elvis Presley a little bit later as well. But why the early game shows thrived on television and the rise of them were because they were inexpensive to produce. They were easy to broadcast live, and they didn't require professional actors. They didn't require professional writers. The sets were simple. The hosts were charismatic. And they were engaging for at-home audiences because, again, we're yelling at the television. We know the answer. Why doesn't the contestant on TV know it? And when we start talking about the scandals of the 1950s, what's going to happen is that seeing was not always believing. Because what we thought was a random game show was actually being scripted by people behind the scenes. And that is where the trouble stemmed from, and that is what ended up happening. So that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about some of the early TV game shows. And these, I'll show you here real quick. What's My Line was very popular in the 1950s. Another show from the 1950s that required physical challenges was Beat the Clock. And in 1956, The Price is Right was introduced, and it is still going on. The Price is Right is one of the most popular game shows out there. And in 1956, the show 21, which is going to be the core of our conversation today, and it became the center and focal point of the infamous quiz show scandals. Again, if you have not watched that movie, Quiz Show from 1994, excellent movie. Again, the acting, directing, it is just a wonderful take on the quiz show scandals of the 1950s. But why do we watch game shows? Have you ever sat in front of a television and you watch a game show? They're usually shown in the mornings, but there are some primetime game shows that are coming into play, and I'll talk about some of those as well. But why do we watch game shows? We watch them because it is low-stress entertainment, and they're predictable. They have simple rules, clear goals, and they make them easy so when you watch it, you get to relax. It's not a complicated or complex plot. We're just enjoying the game show where we don't even know these people, and we're rooting for them. When they lose, when they win, and we fantasize about the money that is being won on some of these game shows and some of the trips that they win. And we like to see ordinary people win. We like to see people that are down on their luck. And that's why that movie, The Running Man, people are gravitated toward it because, again, it is about this man that's down on his luck, and the only way he sees out of the situation is to go to a game show. And again, unlike scripted shows, game shows feature regular people, and viewers can connect to them. And we think to ourselves, that could be me. I know that much trivia. So it creates this sense of empathy. We care about them and this excitement. Is he going to win? Is she going to lose? Is she going to win the car? Is she going to win that trip? And again, these instant rewards, they trigger our brains. You know, the prizes, the colors, the hosts, all of these different things, they stimulate us, and we feel an instant gratification. We're like, hey, that person won the car. That person won the television. That person won the trip to Hawaii. And again, they encourage participation. We're sitting around and we're yelling at the TV. We're solving the puzzles. We know the answer. How come this contestant doesn't know a simple question that's being asked of them? So they're very engaging, they're very stimulating to us. And they're social, we get together and we watch it and we laugh and we just kind of cheer the people on, and it sparks conversation and competition amongst ourselves. And the game shows that we watch, sometimes there's teamwork, sometimes there's, people vying against others to win. And these game shows, because of the rules and because of the outcomes, they always seem fair. Anybody has an opportunity. And that's the thing. In this messy, messy world, it's satisfying to see a system that is reliable and it could lead to a reward. Because those contestants that appear on these game shows, they may not win the big prizes, but they walk away with some consolation prizes. I remember watching The Price is Right, and that's one of the most popular and more popular game shows. And I remember them mentioning at the very end, additional sponsorship from certain companies, and these are people who were walking away with something at least. And in talking about that, it does give us this sense of nostalgia and this sense of routine. And many game shows have run for decades. The Price is Right, since 1956. Bob Barker was a host, and now Drew Carey is the host of that one. And these classics are still on TV, on daytime TV, such as Let's Make a Deal, Price is Right, and now there's some on primetime. Shows such as The Floor, 99 to Beat, and a couple of years back, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? That was hosted by Regis Philbin, who is a charismatic and wonderful host. Passed away recently, but he was a wonderful host for that show. The perfect host for that show, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? And I remember watching that show live in prime time, sitting there, being able to answer some of the questions, but as soon as they started hitting some of those $400,000 questions, I was out. And maybe less than that. But it's, again, an opportunity to get together. We would watch these game shows as a family. So moving on to the quiz show scandals of the 1950s. And this is going to be where we talk heavy into the history part of it. What ended up happening was that this was a major media controversy in the United States, because several television shows, including 21 that I talked about, and the $64,000 question, and another show called Dotto, they were revealed, and it was revealed in front of Congress, that they were being rigged by producers. Producers, sponsors knew what they were doing, contestants knew what they were doing, and they were rigging the shows. They were creating scripts. They were creating contestants. And these contestants, they were given answers in advance. And they were told how to act. They were instructed how to act for dramatic effect. Or things were manipulated to create more suspense. And they started creating storylines. Storylines that would boost ratings and that would satisfy the sponsors. And again, think about where we're going to. This is the infancy of television. And I talked about this earlier. We got out of World War II. We're excited about what America has to offer us now. We have disposable income. And not all of us have televisions. Television is still expensive. So again, going back to what we talked about earlier about it being a social event, people would gather around neighbors' televisions to watch game shows. They would gather outside of furniture stores. As televisions became less expensive, now you started having more televisions in homes. But at its infancy, this product was expensive. But sponsors knew how to capitalize on that, because what was happening on television, early television, soap operas, news, and game shows. And people were watching game shows because of the money. This is astronomical money that people were making on these game shows. And again, I can do that. I am smart enough to go on a game show. And that's what people, and that's why, excuse me, people tuned in. Or because they wanted to watch what was going to happen. How much is this person going to walk away with? How much money are they going to make? And that was one of the appeals. Money that we had never heard of before, money that we had never seen that amount before. For somebody winning on a game show, they're not even working for it, they're winning on a game show. And so what ends up happening is that the scandal breaks in 1958. And it happened because disgruntled contestants, people that had been done wrong by the production company, came forward with evidence of cheating at a big level and at a major level. And again, I talked about this earlier, the congressional hearings of 1959, these exposed this widespread deception that was taking place within this industry of game shows. And this is what I want to talk about. And this is where we go into what the public thought about this. Because what happens is that now that you find out that these game shows are rigged and it wasn't what we were watching, that it was real, the public trust in television is shaken. And what ends up happening is that now networks, and again, there are only 3 networks, ABC, CBS, and NBC, they have to take greater control of program standards. And in 1960, you have the Communications Act. And this Communications Act of 1960 makes it illegal to fix any broadcast contests. In other words, you could not rig game shows anymore. And it had to come down to an act by Congress. And what happened was that the scandals transformed U.S. broadcasting ethics. And it led to stricter regulations, which is great. And these regulations are still affecting game shows today. Again, you lost the public trust. And one of those persons that was deeply affected by the quiz show scandals was a man by the name of Dr. Charles Van Doren. Charles Van Doren came from a very prominent academic family. His father was a famous poet, his mother was a famous writer, and his uncle was this scholarly historian. So his upbringing was all about learning, was all about education. He was a professor at Columbia University, and at the time, he was making about $4,000 a year, and he decides that he wants to audition for a game show called 21. And again, we talked about that earlier. 21 is the most infamous case of cheating. And that's what that movie Quiz Show is about the game show 21 and about Charles Van Doren. So Charles Van Doren is seen by producers as this new star. He's young, he's good looking, he's charismatic, and he's highly educated with a PhD. And he's a professor at Columbia. So when producers saw him, they tailor-made the show and the script for him to keep winning. And he became an instant celebrity. Overnight, he became an instant celebrity. And again, we talked about people that were affected by this, and he's the one that takes the most hit by this quiz show scandal. And what ends up happening is that Charles Van Doren and Herbert Stemple, another contestant, it was all scripted and it was all worked out. And I talked about this earlier about how they would write these scripts to leave cliffhangers and leave you wanting more, and that's exactly what they did in this particular situation. They wrote a script that had Charles Van Doren ultimately becoming the champion. And they acted out the parts. They were told when to wipe their brow. They were told when to gasp. It was a script. And the American public thought it was real. And not to take anything away from the education that Charles Van Doren had, but he did not possess this much knowledge to be able to answer every single question that was asked of him on the game show. But what happens is a weird thing, and I talked about Elvis Presley a little bit earlier. What happens is that now on television, you have a role model that parents are looking up to. You see this young, educated individual who is smart, who is charismatic, who is on television. And think about what's happening also in music. You have Elvis Presley, who is making his mark on the world. And a lot of parents are concerned about Elvis Presley. A lot of parents are worried, what is the influence that Elvis Presley is going to have on my son and my daughter? So now Charles Van Doren is seen as this champion for education, this champion for knowledge, and parents are now pushing their kids towards looking at Charles Van Doren as a role model. And some parents report that their sons or daughters, because of Charles Van Doren, would run home and instead of turning on the radio, they would do their homework. How true that is, I have no idea. So for several years, he's running this scam, essentially, of pretending to be somebody he's not. During his run, he would win over $129,000, and this is in 1957. Today, it's about a little over $1.4 million of 1957 money. And in 1959, when he came clean and admitted that he had cheated and he had been given the answers, he had to step down from his teaching job at Columbia University, and he struggled with the rest of his life with this shame that he had brought to his name. He ended up working for Encyclopedia Britannica, and he wrote a couple of books under several different pseudonyms. But he never bounced back, I guess, essentially, because he was part of a major rigging of these shows. And again, the public was outraged, and they lost trust in television. Thank you so much again for indulging me in this conversation. I really like talking about this, and I could continue talking about it, but we are going to go to a music break. Thank you so very much, everybody. You're listening to Library Talk and everything else only on Vaquero Radio, the Valley's student station. Thank you so much, everybody. Talking about Elvis, I needed to play a little bit of Elvis for you, and I'll be home for Christmas. Elvis and Michael Bublé, I believe, at least for me, have some of the best Christmas music out there. Oh, and Nat King Cole. I really like Nat King Cole's Christmas music as well. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening. We're getting ready to close out the show, and time goes by very quickly. But a couple of things that we want to kind of go over before we end the show is I do want to look at the impact, though, that these game shows scandals had on broadcasting. And we'll take a quick look at that, because now what you have is this strengthening of a federal oversight. You have the Communications Act, and you have all of these different measures in place so that rigging of these game shows doesn't happen anymore. And now there is more and greater network responsibility to ensure that things like this don't happen. So the networks took a little more control, because prior to that, who was in charge? People that were in charge were big industry, and for a lot of companies and for a lot of networks, big pharmaceuticals were in charge of running the show behind the scenes. And so now you had standards and practices, things that are coming into that are going to push towards a more transparent type of television landscape. And again, the impact on the public trust is what got affected. It eroded the public trust. Many viewers felt that they were betrayed. They believed in Charles Van Doren. They believed in what they were watching was real. They believed in these game shows. To come to find out that it was all scripted, it really affected a lot of people, and they became skeptical of what they were watching. One of the long-term effects, though, was that there was a skepticism now. that things that we were watching were not real. And I think that's sometimes affecting our current television. There are so many reality television shows out there that it it seems so strange that some of that reality television would not be scripted. And again, things are not always what they seem. A couple of years back, my brother-in-law and I, we became big fans of the show Pawn Stars. And so we were in Las Vegas, and when we went to the Pawn Stars pawn shop where it's filmed, it is totally different from what you see on television. There are angles that you don't see. There's this whole other area that is never filmed. And so you start to wonder and you start to question, well, if this is not real, are the people that are on this show not real? And so you begin to question. So this idea of skepticism, I guess that was what became a long term, cultural effect of this. But again, you have shows like Jeopardy and Wheel of Fortune that are highly regulated, and the standardized practices prevent rigging from happening. So, with all of that, what are the top 10 game shows? So, I went on the internet, did some research, and I found an article. And this is an article from Top 25 Game Shows according to Susan Pennington, Chris Beecham, and Misty Holland. And this was an article that was written for this website called Gold Derby on August 16th, 2024. Now, they mentioned top 25, but I'm not going to go over the top 25. I'm going to go over the top 10. And some of these I've already spoken about and I've talked about. But according to this list and this ranking, number 10 is Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? And I talked about that show earlier. Number 9, Wheel of Fortune, and that is still going on. Let's Make a Deal. That one is on CBS during the daytime, so that's something that's still happening. Hollywood Squares, number 7. Number 6, Password. Number 5, Pyramid. Number 4, Match Game. Number 3, Family Feud. Number 2, Price is Right. And number 1, Jeopardy. Now, I watch Jeopardy, but I never know the answers to that, or questions, I guess, right? Because it's kind of formatted a little bit different. But it's always interesting to see how much knowledge these people know. And again, because things are not rigged anymore, this is knowledge that we hope the contestants are bringing as part of their own education and knowledge. I'm going to go to a music break, and I want you to come back because I have a couple of announcements as we close out the show. But thank you so very much. I honestly thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of this conversation. You're listening to Library Talk and everything else only on Vaquero Radio, the Valley's student station. Again, a little bit of Christmas music to kind of get us going. I know there's a lot that's going to be happening within the next couple of weeks with Christmas parades and gatherings and all of these different things. And so enjoy it. Enjoy those opportunities that you have to share with family and friends. We're getting ready to close out the show for the semester, but I wanted to make a couple of announcements. I want to announce and remind everybody that UTRGV's graduation will be held on Saturday, the 20th of December. And I want to congratulate all graduates, whether you're graduating from here, you're graduating from somewhere else. If you're getting close to graduation and you're going to be graduating soon, please continue going, continue fighting the good fight because it'll totally be worth it as you walk across the stage. So again, to all graduates, wish you all the best of luck, because success, may it find you, and may all your professional endeavors continue to be successful. I want to mention a couple of other things. And one of them is because of the success of this show, and you are a major part of the success of this show, I have been given the opportunity and the privilege to present at the 2026 Texas Library Association Annual Conference in Houston, Texas. My presentation is entitled On the Air, Creating a Library Radio Show to Engage, Educate, and Inspire. And again, it is because of your support of the show. So thank you so very much. I really appreciate you from the beginning if you've been listening. You that has just started listening. Thank you so very much. This other announcement is a little bit personal, and I'm gonna kind of close the show with a personal story, but I want to maybe one of the more important announcements that I've made throughout my tenure on Library Talk and everything else is that today is my father's birthday. Mr. Jose Hector Chirinos, Dad, happy birthday to you. I am so proud to be your son. I am so proud of both my parents. I want to talk about my father because my father is such an influential person and has been such a pillar in our society as an educator, as a principal, as a board member on the school district of BISD. And he has motivated, inspired, and touched so many people that I am sure I'm not the only one today, Dad, that is wishing you a very happy birthday and many more. As we celebrate you, as we celebrate everybody else that is celebrating a birthday today, please take time and honor those people. But thank you, Dad, honestly, for being such a wonderful father, and my mom as well. And I mentioned that I'm going to talk about something personal here, and I am going to talk about, as we close out the show, I want to mention one member of my family. And I want to preface this by saying that every member of my family, whether it's my family, whether it's my family in law, whether it's my cousins, my nephews, my nieces, uncles, aunts, everybody, I have been truly, truly blessed with such a wonderful family. My brother, like I said, my parents. But there's one person that I want to talk about today, and that person is going to connect somehow to our topic today of game shows, and it's kind of a tenuous connection, but I want to talk about this person today. And this person was my father's sister, Catarina, who we all affectionately called Cata. Everybody called her Cata. Let me see if I can get through this. Cata was the aunt. She was the one that you could go to with your secrets, with the most ridiculous and extreme favors. You can go to her and she would grant them and she would help you. She lived close to the college, and so if you were hungry at lunchtime, it always seemed like she had something readily available to eat. And not only for us, but for anybody that would stop by. She was such a wonderful and caring person. And I know it may sound like a cliche, but she was the person that you could go to and she would help you and she would sit down with you and she would listen to you. And she had her own set of advice. And everybody loved Gata. She was the center of attention. She was the center of a party. She was the one that everybody wanted to sit next to. She was the one that was listening to you when you were younger. She was the one that you could go to. She would give you her last $10 so that you could put gas in your car. She was that aunt. And I bring her up because, again, it's going to connect to game shows. It really is. But I bring her up because she was such a wonderful person and she loved her husband Mario, who I've talked about a couple of episodes back when I was discussing the Los Angeles Dodgers, because he's a big Dodgers fan, and with the World Series win, he was so excited about that. So she loved her husband Mario. She loved her kids, her grandkids, her nieces, nephews, and again, everybody loved her. Everybody called her Cata. You could go to her house, like I said, and just feel the warmth of her and her presence. It was just she's such a wonderful person. But I bring her up in this episode because when I was younger, my parents worked. Excuse me. Excuse me. My parents worked. And when I would get sick and I was too young to stay by myself, my parents would take me to her house. She didn't work. And so she would take care of me. And by take care of me, I mean I would sit on the TV and she would spoil me. And she would cater to everything I wanted and let me watch whatever I wanted and let me eat whatever I wanted. So I really liked staying at her house because she really did spoil me. So they would take me to her house and she was always busy. There was something always going on. Whether she was making breakfast for Mario, and then Mario would leave to go to work and she had to get her kids ready, my cousins. And then she had to start getting ready for lunch because my uncle Mario would come for lunch, and then Mario would leave, and she'd start getting ready to go pick up my cousins from school and start getting ready for dinner, and somebody would drop by her house to talk in el patio, el corredor, and like again, there was always something going on. She was cleaning, she was doing this, that, and the other, and so I would sit on the couch and watch television, and there really wasn't much to watch. There were game shows in the morning, soap operas in the afternoon, and then cartoons didn't happen until later on in the day. So I'd sit there and she'd check up on me, and I'd be sitting there watching game shows, The Price is Right, Press Your Luck, all these different game shows that I would watch. And I'd sit there and she'd bring me snacks and she'd bring me orange juice and she'd check up on me. And like I said, there was so much going on in her life. There was so much going on in that house, so much going on in that home, that it was very hard sometimes for her to kind of take a break. But she would take these breaks and she'd sit down with me. She'd sit down there with me and we'd talk and we'd laugh and we'd joke around and we'd talk about the game shows that we were watching. And we'd say, Kata, he's going to win the car. And she'd be like, no, mijo, he's bidding too much money on that. He's not going to win. And then to make things more interesting, we started making these side bets. And so, Kata, I bet you $1 he's going to win that trip. No, mijo, no, he's not going to win. And then he would win. So I'd win $1. And then next contestant, she'd win $1. And then I'd go up $2 and she'd go up $2. And then I'd go up $3 and she'd go up $3. And at the very end of the day, we always seemed to even out. And we always seemed to just balance each other out. But I remember sitting there making these bets and laughing at the contestants that had these silly answers. But one time, one of the last times that she took care of me because I was now getting older and I could stay by myself, one of the last times, I finally beat her. I finally won. I was up $5. I was up $5. And I won. And for a little kid, $5 is a lot of money. But it was short-lived because she said, I'm sorry, mijo, I don't have the $5 with me. I'll have to pay you next time. And the next time became next time. And the next time became next time. And then it became this running thing between her and I, where even as I was getting older, she would still tell me, mijo, te debo los $5. I owe you those $5. I still haven't forgotten those $5. And those $5 was always kind of a thing between her and I. She passed away in 2011. And I never saw my $5. She never paid me the $5. Never saw him. But what she gave me, those moments that we spent together, those moments that we shared, and those memories that I carry with me were worth a lot more than those $5. Because for as hectic as a schedule that she had, and for the fact that people were looking for her all the time, for those moments that her and I got to sit down and watch those game shows together and make those side bets and laugh, she was all mine. She was all mine for those moments. For me to laugh with, for me to cheer, she was all mine. And for that, I thank her. I thank her for the opportunity that I had to share those moments that I am still talking about 40 years later. Those moments of laughing together, talking together, those are some things that I'm always going to carry with me. So thank you, Katarina. Thank you, Kata, for those memories and those moments. She was such a wonderful person. As we go into the holidays, I ask you to create memories, to share moments with your family, to create new moments, and to cherish all of them. We're going into 2026, and we have no idea what 2026 will bring. But let's try to end 2025 on a high note. I ask you that you take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and thank you so much, honestly, for you supporting the show. You've made it such a wonderful journey and such a wonderful experience. I wish you all the best. I wish everybody a wonderful holidays. I wish everybody a wonderful 2026. And again, I truly appreciate everything that you've done as we have gone through this show. Gracias. Thank you. You've been listening to Library Talk and everything else only on Vaquero Radio, the Valley's student station.